Hi everyone, and welcome to our fourth session of our 5G webinars with colleague, friend, and ICT architect Karim Rabie. Today we'll continue our journey. So as we mentioned, the first three sessions we covered the 5G roadmaps, ICT requirements, we cover some use cases, and today we are ready to go with 5G orchestration. I believe it will be a very exciting session, and we did a lot of preparation and sessions with Karim to come up with this agenda. So today we'll talk about, we'll go quickly about network slicing review. Then we will cover 5G orchestration concepts, architecture, and we'll go into more details. What are the life cycle management tools and framework we need to assure the network slicing? And finally, we will discuss the interlock with the famous ETSI NFV architecture. So happy to have you again, Karim, and welcome everyone.
Thank you, Radwan. And yes, 5G orchestration topic is a very trending one. Maybe a little bit. This is not the comfort zone of the the 5G community. People focusing on core and radio. So and I acknowledge that there are I would say some colleagues who are allergic to the term orchestration. But with the 5G, it seems to be, I would say, mandatory to have. Very closely coupled with network slicing, very closely coupled with the 5G nature of providing dynamic services, and actually very closely coupled again with the network slicing. That's why we are starting first, setting some basics for network slicing, and then we step on that and we go to the 5G orchestration concept. Do you want me to share, Radwan, or you'll be sharing?
As you like, if you want to drive, you can share. Yeah. So you'll be able, if you want to do some annotation or description, it will
Yeah.
be easier if you share. Okay, go ahead.
Let me share.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead, Karim.
Okay, so we start with, as usual, I would like to give some sort of historical background and maybe the technological evolution of a certain functionality or technology. So for network slicing, I believe that the concept of slicing the network was there even in 3G and 4G, but was there somehow virtually logically in the concept of APN. Okay. So somehow a group of users like corporate users or consumers were grouped under APNs, and under these APNs you used to put some sort of quality service profiles, some settings, and somehow because of the because of the MBB characteristics, this profile is extended end to end. So I would say the APNs was the initial step on having some sort of slicing of the network. It was not called slicing, but at the end, it was mapped to somehow to end-to-end periods. This is what we used to use as a term. Starting from 4G, not with the evolution of 4G releases, starting from R13 and R14, the concept of DCN or dedicated core network started to evolve, where the concept was okay. Instead of having an APN, instead of having like dedicated bureaus, why don't we dedicate a core network to a certain segment? Okay. And the framework was relying on some attributes can be sent by the UE or some information or assistance from the as for example, to I would say direct the terminal, if it's a handset, if it's a IoT smart home, to its specific dedicated core network. That was in release 13 and R14, and that was the pre 5G releases. But by that time, there was no big, I would say, adoption from the vendors themselves and from the customers, because they all believe that, okay, we are going for 5G. We don't see a big use case for that in 3G and 4G. So let's wait for 5G. Okay. So the concept has evolved to the network splicing. So network splicing in 5G, the framework is there in R15. And in general, it's an end-to-end slicing, so it's not limited only to the core network. As per the 3GPP, and that's something that we're going to show, it is an end-to-end slice that corresponds to a slice subnet or sub-slice in the core and sub-slice in the radio and even sub-slice in the transport. Okay, so it's an end-to-end slice, and we start to have some terms like network slice instance. And for the sake of identification and global identification, the 3GPP has standardized, and that's in R16, 4 standard network slice, what we call SST or service slice service type, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, like for eMBB and for IoT, for ultra latency and reliable use cases, and for V2X. So this means that whatever the terminal room across the operators, it still keep its profile. Like I'm a vehicle that uses V2X. So hopefully it's going to have a unified treatment across all the operators. And the framework allowed like it's 2 to the power 8 slice service type with a lot of different combinations. So at a nutshell, as a summary, the CSB or the mobile operator can provide a huge number of dynamic slices on demand, and that exactly, I would say, pointed to the need of an orchestration framework that can manage the lifecycle management of these slices. Okay, that can lease on demand, instantiate on demand, terminate on demand, and make sure that the SLAs is met for a specific slice. Make some sort of closed loop control on a slice level. So this is the evolution, and we believe that R16, R17 is going to provide more, I would say, stage 3 or more low-level details on how these slices will go into deployment. So that's why it's very common now that people in the NSA stage, they are not looking for slicing, but once we go to the SA standalone deployment, once we go to 5G deployment, we will go to the network slicing use cases.
100%, yeah. So let me summarize again, Karim. So I believe what we need to highlight here that network slicing is not something new. It has been there for quite some time, and even it was something like optional in 3G, 4G, which was mandatory, more like connectivity and giving more bandwidth. As we discussed in previous sessions, that 5G is different than 4G. It's not about connectivity, it's about service and user experience. So in order to deliver these different services and give each service maybe different requirements, network slicing is more critical for 5G, and that's why we need Orchestrator to make sure managing the slice for enhanced mobile broadband, ultra reliable, low latency, and so on. If we go to the next slide, also Karim, he touched base on the network slicing. It's like more end-to-end. So it's cover core, radio, access, and also transport. So here in transport, I just want also as a review to tell you that from transport or IP MPLS layer, also we had slicing long time back. We're not using only slicing for mobile, we're using even for the campus networking, for data center, and so on. And here we're trying to highlight that segmentation can vary from physical, or we can say hard slicing, to logical or soft slicing. In the physical slicing, you can see we have completely dedicated network. So as example, we can build one network in blue responsible for the internet traffic, and another building for the secure traffic, another network in orange maybe for secure traffic like CCTV, building management system, and so on. But this is a bit expensive, so we advanced to more logical and more soft slicing, like some concept of getting the same device but doing some allocation, or divide this one chassis into two multiple devices, but physically each line card will be dedicated to one SRD or VDC, as we call it in Cisco world. Then a more enhancement and a more advanced, which will assure better OpEx, is to do it virtualized. As example, we have the same device, but we will create multiple VPNs, multiple VRFs. The challenge with this one that the resources are shared. So in case of congestions, the different VRF or the different VPN will start competing over the same resources like device CPU or bandwidth and so on. And finally, with the enhancement recently, talking about segment routing and how we can have our topology and divide it into multiple instances, and each instance will give a specific requirement. So maybe one instance is concerned about bandwidth, another instance focus on delay, another instance focus on metric, and so on. This will make it very flexible and very programmable for the mobile core to choose the right instance based on this segment routing flex algo. And maybe in the next slide, we can, sorry, in the next sessions, we can talk in details about how to achieve this slicing in the transport network. Back to you, Karim.
Thanks, Radwan. And it is very important to cover the transport piece because you know that I'm coming from core background, and some colleagues here are coming from IMS and core and radio. So the 3GPP is focusing on the core and radio, right? But it's giving only recommendations for transport, not giving how the slicing going to be realized on the transport. So it's very important to understand what are I would say, how to deliver the service from the transport perspective.
Exactly. Thank you, Karim.
Okay, so we start now. That's the I would say the start of the 5G orchestration slides. I thought about an idea that I understand that orchestration is a very trending word, and it's being used by many vendors in many contexts, and it might be confusing sometimes. So that's why I agreed with Radwan that okay, we spend some time, like maybe 3 or 4 slides, to talk about the orchestration itself as a concept and not the 5G. So when we move to the 5G orchestration, it becomes more clear. Okay, that's why the next slides are focusing on the concept of orchestration. And please feel free to just post any question in the chat, and we will be happy to respond to it. So I start with a slide about the concept of orchestration. I will leave you with like a small video of 2 minutes or maybe 2 minutes and a half, and then we can resume back. Hold on, please. I hope it works. Can you hear the audio, everyone?
We cannot see your YouTube share.
Yes, I'm going to share now. Hold on, please. Okay, do you see it now? Radwan? Okay, can you hear the audio?
Not really.
Radwan, no audio, right?
No audio. Yes. 1 second.
Can I just give you a comment in WebEx? You have to when you share, you have to share the content, and then there's an option that you have to say share computer.
Can you hear?
Thank you, Radwan. It's a nice 2 minutes orchestra of Mission Impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can I have the chair again, please?
Yes, okay, go ahead.
Okay. Do you see my screen?
It's coming back. Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay. So it's a typical example, right? We during the last years, people have always tried to map the concept of orchestration to the maestro of the orchestra. Although it is a typical and a legacy example, but I found it very useful. Okay, to understand how the orchestration works or what is the role of orchestrators. So if we take it one by one, and maybe we can conduct some sort of discussion. So we have to identify what was the role of the maestro and what was the role of the musician. Okay, so the maestro actually he leads an orchestra, right? So he is an orchestrator of a certain domain of the orchestra of the musicians of the tools that owned by these musicians. The role is very simple, is to deliver this symphony, right? The role is not just to play like one musical note of a violin or trumpet. No, he wants to deliver a full symphony. Unlike the musician role is actually part of the overall picture, okay? The musician has a very definitive role of performing a certain musical note upon the triggering or upon a signal from the maestro or from the orchestrator, okay? The success of the musician is to be able to deliver the musical note at the right time based on the orchestration or the maestro, and the success of the maestro is actually being able to deliver the full symphony. If you if we discuss the tools that's being used, so the maestro have some sort of musical notes, right? This musical note is actually in the full symphony, what instrument is doing what at what time. So in the concept of orchestration, this is exactly the service modeling. That's the service model, what we call the service descriptor, on how the end-to-end service are going to be fulfilled. But if you see the musician notes, the one in front of them, that help them upon the signal from the orchestrator to explain to them what to do and their milestones. Okay, so for me, this musician notes is more like a script. Okay, and for example, if the player on the violin was not there, and there is a machine doing his work, so upon a triggering from the maestro, this machine will just read the script and fulfill it. So for me, the musician note is more like an automation step in the full orchestration framework. I can map that, and we will do the mapping after a while. I can map that easily to something like laser configuration, like Ansible, doing a certain task. Okay.
Exactly.
But what about the error scenarios, for example? What about the musician had an error? Does the musician have the capability to do a corrective action? Most probably, if he does a corrective action, the whole symphony will collapse, right? So the one who handled the error commonly is the orchestration, not an automation tool, not the musician. Because, for example, if I am the maestro and then I found that the one in the violin made an error, I can signal the trumpet to increase the tone and cover the error. Or maybe I will take a decision that, okay, let's stop, guys, and let's do a rollback and start from the beginning. These are error scenarios are there in the orchestration because they have some sort of something called workflow orchestration, that what to do upon success and what to do upon failure, like stepwise. Like I go this direction. If it succeed, I go this direction. So what if this step got something wrong or failed? Then I have a rollback scenario. So these error scenarios handling can handle only by the orchestration. And then the last thing, once the show is performed, once the symphony is introduced to the audience, the maestro, okay, from experience perspective, he will say, okay, I delivered Mission Impossible Symphony. So the maestro has to update his CV, right? This is the same concept of service inventory. Most of the orchestrations solutions have inventories. Once the service is deployed, once the service is fulfilled, the service inventory must be updated. Okay. However, from musician perspective, he succeeded when he played the musical note in front of him doing his part. Okay. So it's not very stateful in the way that he has to update a certain inventory, certain database. No. Every time he's asked to do this musical note, he'll just do it. Same like Ansible and same like automation scripts. Once you trigger them to do the script maybe 1,000 times, they'll just do it. Okay. But from service perspective, once it is delivered, the orchestration normally updates the service inventory to have what we call a service record. So if we want to do some sort of quick mapping, okay, on what we have said on one of the well-known orchestration engines for all of us, I would choose the NFVO. The NFVO is basically an orchestrator that orchestrates NFV domain, and that's very important. This is a very important point. There is nothing called orchestrator in general. You have to tell me what do you orchestrate? Tell me the domain name. Tell me the service that you are doing to orchestrate. So this is the orchestration for the NFV domain. It lies in the resources domain, so it doesn't care actually about the real service. For example, if you are deploying a UPF, for example, a virtual UPF, so the NFVO will be very keen to make sure that this virtual service or virtual network function is deployed. It doesn't care a lot about the exact service, like the KPIs, the APNs, the IP pool utilization. This is something a higher level, which is a service domain. So the NFVO is having the maestro role because he's doing the resources orchestration for the NFV. He's doing the network service orchestration in the NFV domain. However, if you want to push day 0 configuration or day 1 configuration, most probably the NFVO interrogated the VNFM or maybe interrogate Ansible. So these are the musicians in that sense. From musical notes perspective or from templates perspective, the NFVO has something called network service descriptor that actually does the modeling for network services. That it composed of these VNFs, and these VNFs correspond to these VNFMs. So that's a hierarchy of the network service, and most probably it's based on Tosca, and sometimes it can be based also on Yang. Where in the musician nodes, you find that day0 scripts can be there in the VNFM, can be there in the Ansible, even in the OpenStack, you can rely on heat templates. So these are all like musician nodes. These are tools that can be used by the orchestrator to deliver a use case. For error scenarios, if you have the core flow of the lifecycle management of the VNFs or network service in your head, you will always see that the triggering is always coming from the NFVO. So NFVO tells the VNFM to instantiate VNF, and the NFVO subscribes to notification from the VNFM. Whatever VNFM is doing something, it updates the NFVO. Okay, so that NFVO can understand the outcome of the procedures. Either it is positive or negative. And if it is negative, there should be a rollback scenario. So most probably the error scenarios are handled by the NFVO. There are also some solutions from some vendors that actually doing the closed loop control through the NFVO. For example, the NFVO can get fault management, performance management from the stack and perform some sort of corrective action. And upon a successful show or a successful deployment of VNF or network service, there is a repository in the NFVO called NFV inventory. Once the VNF is deployed or network service is deployed, the NFVO updates the records saying, okay, this network service is deployed, it corresponds to these VNFs, and these VNFs correspond to these virtual machines, and hopefully at some vendors, these virtual machines correspond to these bare metal servers or hosts. So that was just a quick analogy of the role of orchestration from a real, I would say, orchestration of an orchestra or opera orchestra.
Yeah, thank you for that, Karim. I like the analogy, and when we discuss it, that how we match the role of maestro or orchestrator to a lot of orchestrator we have in our IT and telecommunication field. that also can decide the service. Even the maestro, in some situation, he decide number of violin, and for this symphony, I need 10 violins. I need 2 trumpets. Similar to a network, I need 4 firewalls, 2 load balancers. So not only the function, but also the number of instances. So this will lead me to a question, Karim. The word orchestrator, as you mentioned, we can have a lot of orchestration in even within our domain. So what are the domains that we can have orchestrator? As example, we talked about some resource orchestrator to manage the network resources. What are the other domains which we can have?
Okay, this is a very good question, and this touches the main, I would say, reason of the confusion in the community. Okay, because basically any service provider, CSP, DSP, any even enterprise is constructed from multiple domains. Okay, these domains like resources, services, product, sales, and I have a slide for that.
Yes, we can go to that slide if you don't mind. Yeah.
I guess, yeah, okay. So this is the one. So
Yeah.
what I'm bringing here is actually the framework domains from the TMF, TM forum. So this is actually the domains that build any CSP organization. Okay. Yani quickly, if you can just go from top to bottom,
Yes.
we have the sales domain. That's a domain that owns the marketplaces, the e-channel, the digital channels. This is how you sell your products, your commercials. And this commonly belongs to the commercial team or sales team. And you have the product domain. This is like the domain where the products are defined, the bundles are formed, the offerings, these kind of things. And normally this belongs to the marketing teams. And you have the customer domain. The customer domain, this is where you capture the customer orders, where you capture the customer complaints. This is very common to have the CRM systems and also having the BSS for the billing. So this is commonly mapped to the BSS teams, work on the BSS. And then you have the service domain. So service domain is that where you define the services, the real services that correspond to the products that you are selling or the resources that you are consuming. So these services can be anything. Can be the OSS systems doing service provisioning, service activation. Can be the service catalogs. Can be in the track of assurance. Can be the service assurance systems like FMPM, closed loop control. Can be the SQM, service quality management. So that's the service domain, and that's anyone here of the colleagues owning a core function or ready function. He is there in the service domain. And then in the resources domain, that's the resources where it includes the infrastructure, for example, like the NFV, like the bare metal servers, like the physical functions, like the transmission fiber. This is what compose the resources domain. And then you have the supplier partner domain, for example. That's where you need to have the workforce management to invoke, for example, third-party technicians to deliver a certain CPE. So that's supply chain thing. And then the enterprise domain, that's the actual teams that do the financing, HR, accounting on your company. So what is confusing here is that there are orchestration capabilities across multiple domains. But
Exactly.
when people start to fight, they don't recall this fact. So you find that, okay, I have the NFVO in the resources domain, but you see that NFVO vendor, for example, is trying to get some, I would say, service aspects. But this is conflicting with what is there in the service. And you find that in customer domain, they have a customer order management orchestration capability. So that may conflict with the service order management orchestration capability in service domain. So this is the function, and this is the importance of having an enterprise architecture team or a team that sets the borders between different departments. Okay, or you adopt a certain like digital architecture like the ODA from TMF that is very business focused and not built on a legacy way of distributing tasks. In that way, these domains can work with each other homogeneously. But at the end, orchestration. There is orchestration in the customer domain, orchestration in service domain, orchestration in the resources domain.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why when we talked about to avoid confusion, when we talk about orchestrator, you need to define this orchestrator is responsible of which domain. And as many of us can see that sometimes even within the same domain, like resources, if you have a mobile operator, maybe you will have an orchestrator for the radio, orchestrator for the access, orchestrator for the transport. So even within the same domain, you may have multiple orchestrator. And Karim will explain what are the integration with different domains and maybe what is the role of end-to-end orchestrator. But before we move to this point, we have one question from our colleague Farhan. If we get back to the analogy of the maestro and the musician, is the musician role determined by whether is it direct or indirect mode in orchestration?
Okay, it's a very I would say specific question to the direct and indirect mode in the ETSI NFV. Okay, so commonly it's some sort of strategy adopted by the telco cloud itself. For example, if you are a CSP that have a telco cloud, and from readiness perspective, you have decided that you will work with the indirect mode, for example. The indirect mode, for example, implies that NFVO communicate directly with the VIM and not the VNFM. But maybe other strategies would say, no, I will go with the direct mode, and that's the most mature one. The direct mode is that VNFM can communicate with the VIM directly, but it must get the granting from the NFVO. So this means that the NFVO still grant any action taken by the VNFM, so it still keeps the maestro capability. So if you ask me, the direct mode is more common, having granting interface between VNFM and NFVO, while indirect is not yet, I would say, supported by the majority of the VNFM and NFVO vendors.
Thank you, Karim.
Okay, the most important thing that we have to understand that there are vertical processes, okay, across any CSP domain or environment, okay, and these processes are very well known for people working on you know this ETOM, TAM, this kind of things doing the architecture of the enterprises. So we have, I'll take it from right to left. So we have the billing and revenue management. So that's the processes that actually realize the rating, the charging, and issuing bills to the customers. And we have the assurance. Okay, that's where you can find systems for service assurance like UFM, UPM from IBM, from others. And you can find the systems in the customer domain that gets tickets or fault tickets from the customers. That's all under the assurance. And you have the fulfillment. The fulfillment is actually how you do service activation, service provisioning, customer order management, service order management, even resource order management. That's part of fulfillment. The 0D1 configuration, that's all part of fulfillment. Those are operation support and readiness. That's the process that include the inventories. Either it is a resource inventory or service inventory. And then strategy, infrastructure, and product, that's the processes that owns the catalogs. And there are many types of catalogs. There's a product catalog, and there's something called service catalog, and something called VNF catalog, like resources catalog. So in reality, it looks like that. Any CSP environment is an intersection, a mix between domains and processes. And this kind of intersection create applications, and these applications are owned by teams and owned by departments. So most probably, if you are working in a CSP environment and you made a survey inside your enterprise, you will find that the teams and departments in your enterprise are mapped somehow to these applications. Like IT is taking the customer domain and fulfillment. Like network is taking the service domain and the resources, while the assurance is mixed between IT and network. So these kind of things that shape the enterprise architecture. And when you mention the orchestration capability, it's simply, for example, in service domain, it's a capability that spans across these processes. This means that if I'm a vendor and I'm providing you as a customer a service orchestration, most probably I will include in my orchestration, I will include a service inventory, I will include a service order management capability, like doing service provisioning, service activation, and service configuration. I will include a capability for service fault management and performance management and closed loop control. And also I can extend that to include a service catalog. And in reality, this is the composition of most of the orchestrators in the market. Okay, the same concept applies in the customer domain, where they have a customer order management orchestration capability, and it applies also in the resources domain, where they have a resource orchestration capability that spans across these domains. And if we take the NFVO as an example in the resources domain, it has a catalog, a resources catalog, which is the VNF catalog and NS catalog. It has an inventory, which is the NFV inventory. It has a capability to do resource order management, like resource provisioning. It can tell OpenStack to instantiate virtual machines. It can trigger and push day 0 and day 1 configuration, so it has the capability. And it can deal with the fault management and performance management of the T-Cloud or for the infrastructure. So I hope you got the concept that there are multiple orchestration capabilities in multiple domains. And what causes confusion sometimes, that there are some solutions that combine both of them. For example, you can get an NFVO from a vendor, and then the NFVO that exists in the resources domain can tell you, okay, by the way, I can give you the end configuration. I can push service configuration. Okay, that's a good capability, but 100% it will conflict with the systems that have been always doing the service configuration, right? And what causes more conflict, that commonly the resources domain is owned by a team or a department, and the service domain is owned by another team. So it becomes to be a battle of control, or a battle of scopes.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for that, Karim. That's why, yeah, as you mentioned, it's one of the responsibility of the architect or the top management of any company to define these demarcation points, and when they try to assess a vendor, to make sure what are the services and what are the pieces application that they manage. Because even in the resource management, maybe you'll find an NFVO which doesn't support zero touch provisioning or doesn't support service problem management. So we need to consider this when you decide your orchestrator and the interlock between different orchestrators. Yeah. Thank you, Karim. Yeah, let's get to the exciting part. I know this is very, like, we are trying to set the foundation and make sure that we all understand the real meaning of orchestration, because as Karim mentioned, many people, they are confusing and use the word automation when they actually mean orchestration. So I believe orchestration is a bigger or framework, which some of the tasks even you can decide to do it with automation, or even you can do it manually. But orchestration is an overall architecture. So if we start talking about back to 5G, Karim, and here initially we talk about some of the network slicing instance that defined by 3GPP. Here we are back to similar approach, I can see here you're trying to explain the different network slicing we have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So orchestration has been all there in many standard bodies, many open source initiatives, in many communities. But the new thing for the telco community, that's the first time you get the expression of 5G orchestration that was in release 15. We didn't see before something called 4G orchestration. And I explained the coupling between the concept of orchestration and the network slicing. So in reality, okay, or even not in reality, by standard, the operators are allowed to lease or to provide 2 to the power 8 slice service type. So it can sell B2B services 2 to the power 8 slices. And in each slice, you have the option or the capability to do 2 to the power 24 variant of this slide under title slice description or differentiation. So this means that you will have a huge number of network slicing that is dynamically by nature, like can be instantiated or purchased by a marketplace, and then the customer can say, no, I don't want it for maybe 2 days, and then reactivated, or maybe only activated in few days, activated in a region, in a certain HDC. So it is a very dynamic by nature. That's why moving with this approach in a legacy way, in a I would say in a legacy way of operations will never scale. So you need basically a 5G orchestration framework, and that's why the 3GPP has introduced this framework. And there are a lot of reference in the standards to ETSI NFV and to GSMA and to other bodies working on the orchestration. So let us understand first how the 3GPP see the structure of a network slice. Okay. I hope you can hear me, because you are all on mute. But yeah.
Yes, Karim, I can hear you.
Okay. So in 3GPP, there's the concept of communication service. Okay. And the communication service has been always there for people working in the orchestration space and the BSS space and the OSS. So the communication service is actually what we call the customer-facing service. That's the commercial service that's being sold to the end customer, either it's B2B or B2C. So let's say, for example, you are an operator who are offering a slicing service or model for MVNOs. So you are giving them two options. Either he can go to the application or digital channel and can purchase a gold network slice, or maybe a silver network slice. And with the gold, there are some aspects and some SLAs, and with the silver, there are maybe lighter KPIs and SLA. So the communication service is the gold slice or the silver slice. That's the service that you are going to sell to the end user. So the communication service, it corresponds to a network slice instance. In reality, right? What you are selling corresponds to a network slice instance. Okay. And the network slice instance, by structure, it consists of network slice subnet instance in the core, a network slice subnet instance in the radio or in the access, and a transport connectivity. Okay. If 3GPP was covering the transport, they would also write network slice subnet instance in the transport. But because of the coverage itself, 3GPP is mainly focusing on the core and on the radio. So from their perspective, the network slice instance maps to a slice subnet in the core and a slice subnet in the radio, and a transport connecting the access and the core. Okay. This is why it is important, because most probably this is how we are going to do the service modeling. Okay. This is, and for example, if you are going to define an NSI service, for example, if we are using a Yang-based model, then we will say that this service consists of 3 sub-services in the core, in the radio, and the transport, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the general, I would say, vision of 3GPP from service architecture. From a network slice lifecycle management perspective, we had first to understand what is lifecycle management. Okay, so it starts from the time the slice, not even instantiated, it is modeled, okay, and defined in a catalog, starting by the time it is instantiated and in service, and ending with the aging or decommissioning or the termination of the network slice. So that's the full lifecycle management. So in order to be able to provide the network slice as a service, you have to have these capabilities. What are these capabilities? First of all, the slice modeling. Okay, you need to have the right slice templates, the right design tools to model a slice. And this is very common and very, I would say, incumbent capabilities in the orchestration solutions. So most of the service orchestration solutions, they do the modeling based on Yang. The NFVOs, they use based on Tosca. So most of the vendors now are evolving their solutions to be able to do slice modeling for slicing, and also they are going far beyond by giving you predefined templates. For example, I am a vendor, I have experience in V2X, so I understand the slice requirements for the V2X, so I come to you, see, this is a template for a slice for V2X. It has 80% completed and 20% are just variables that we need to tune together according to your environment. In creation, and which is the on-demand instantiation, there should be a framework to do the on-demand instantiation, and it is there because we have always managed to instantiate network service in the NFV domain, and even from service orchestration, this is a very common framework, so it is there. Slice and service, this is actually the smartness of the solution that guarantee the full like monitoring, scaling, healing, activation, deactivation. These are the transactions that can happen during the operation. For example, a customer purchased a slice but decided to deactivate it. So you will deactivate it, but you will not terminate the resources. So that's something that you need to handle. In the slice, suddenly KPIs went low, CPU utilization went high, so you have to scale. So you have to guarantee that your solution does that. And at the end, the termination, because of the dynamic nature of the slice, it is on-demand instantiation and on-demand termination. So at any time, you need to be able to decommission the slice and free up the resources. So to fulfill these four things, the vendors have a full solution that may consist of one or maybe two or three components. And these components somehow map to 3GP functional blocks that have been recently introduced for that sake. And I will show that in the next slide if there are no questions.
Yeah, no, thank you, Karim. I have just a couple of notes that when you talked about the requirement and when 3GPP start defining the requirement of the slice from core and radio, for me it's more like a transport. I consider the mobile core and the radio like customer to use my services. So what is expected to have an end-to-end picture that transport layer will see the requirements coming from this slice modeling and slice requirement. Does it, as I mentioned, does it require low latency? Does it require more bandwidth, like 400 gigs or hundreds of gig, or does it require delay sensitive? So based on that, I will try to give the best or the premium service based on this requirement. Another point I just want to highlight that I believe, as we mentioned, that 5G is more about services and customer experience. So we thought about maybe 4 or 5 slices or different services, but with automation, with programmability, this will give a room to operator to innovate, or maybe give some specific slices to even some enterprises, maybe people working on mining, oil and gas, and so on. So maybe each some of the big enterprises will have their own slices. So instead of 4, as we discussed before, Karim, maybe we'll have 1,000 or more slices in the future.
Yes, 100%. You will have basically hundreds and maybe thousands, and this is a new door for a new gate for the CSPs to approach new verticals, like having slicing for health sector, for factories, for private 5Gs. So the marketing team now can start enjoying exploring new opportunities. Okay, and based on the customer requirement, you can start to do the modeling and then do your own certification process to make sure that this slice fulfill these SLAs. And when it is certified, you put it in the marketplace and anyone can purchase it because you are sure that you can deliver what you committed. Okay.
Yeah. Another point, as you mentioned, hopefully with the cloud native, with the programmability, as you mentioned, the modeling Yang and Tosca and YAML, and now even the core transport radio can speak, have the open API. So the old days, if we can imagine this life cycle, it will be completely manual. So the core team will define the service, maybe they will take few weeks, and then they will give the requirement to the transport will assess it and maybe get back to them in a couple of months that now the slice is ready. But with the beauty of all these new trends in the network DevOps and of programmability and data modeling, I believe this can happen automatically. So the requirement can be sent directly from the service orchestration to the other orchestration of the core, transport, and radio, and maybe you can have the slice in few hours.
Yes, you're right, Radwan. I would say the beauty of this framework of the orchestration is to be able to realize or fulfill the slicing in maybe a few minutes, few hours, so that the customer just click on the marketplace and then voila, he gets an access to his slice. But in reality, what takes time commonly, and this is very important, is the modeling.
Exactly, yeah.
Normally, the modeling takes a lot of time, and that, and for example, you always see in the surveys that most of the operators are complaining about the VNF onboarding duration, that it can take months, right? We have seen that, for example, from Orange. But in reality, what takes months is modeling, is creating the VNF packages, but not the real time or not the exact automated procedures. So that's why I was saying that the vendors now are all coming with pre-modeled slices, templates. I'm sorry. So that is the job of the CSPs to just tune the preferred template, and for sure expedite and fasten the yani lower the time to market for such service.
Sure.
Okay, I have two slides. I think we can finish that in 10 minutes, but these two slides are very important. So we talked about the communication service, the network slice subnet. So this one also is coming from 3GPP, and it is defining, first of all, the new functional blocks defined by 3GPP, and somehow a relation with network service and DNFs in ETSI NFV. So as we agreed, the communication service, that's the service, the customer-facing service, and this is handled by the CSMF, Communication Service Management Function. It's a new functional block from 3GPP, but this doesn't mean that the vendors will have a new product called CSMF. No, this will be absorbed most probably with a service orchestration solution by the vendors, and this is the case in the own app. CSMF, NSMF is part of the service orchestration, and then this communication service, it can map one-to-one or many-to-one network slice, and the network slice is managed by the network slice management function that handles the lifecycle management of the network slice. So the NSMF, as I said, together with the CSMF, most probably many of the vendors are combining that in the SO. If not, NSMF can be as part of something called cross-domain orchestration, but this is not the story of today. And the network slice, from modeling perspective, it maps SSMF, network slice subnet management function. It is very, I would say, most of the community believe at this stage, initial stage, the network slice subnet management function is somehow very coupled with the function itself. So for example, if the UPF, which is the slice subnet in the core coming from Huawei, for example, most probably the network slice management function will come also from Huawei. However, the NSMF and CSMF, there is more potential for, I would say, open architecture and inter-vendor integration. So if you see the relation with the ETSI NFV, the network slice subnet, it can be simply either a network service or a VNF, right? For example, it can be a UPF, so it maps to a VNF, right? Or it can be a network service, like a chain of VNFs. Maybe it can be a UPF and a GI LAN application, like, for example, DPI, TDF. So a network service can consist of UPF and TDF. So that's why the network subnet, because it has direct relations with the virtual domain, that's why the integration with the NFVO comes with the NSSMF. So I'm trying always to bring figures from the standards. Okay, I don't want you to put my personal opinion, but that's how the standardization is thinking. Okay, so you see the relation between the slice subnet and the network service and the VNF, then it makes sense that the NSSMF integrate with the NFVO to instantiate network service, to instantiate a VNF, and using the OSMA NFVO, that's a standard ETSI NFV APIs. Okay, so you have the CSMF on top, and then you have the network slice management function that ideally communicate with multiple domains, core, radio, transport. So the core and radio virtual functions, for example, VRAN, VDU, VCU, UPF, DTF, can be handled by the NSSMF talking to the NFVO, and the transport domain can be tackled by the NSMF communicating directly with either a domain orchestrator of the transport or maybe a WAN SDN or whatever, abstracting the transport domain. And then there is one new function, which is the NFMF, Network Function Management Function. This is somehow responsible of the configuration and the fault management, performance management. That's why some vendors see that it's a part of the EMS. So it's a very good candidate to be part of the EMS. So this is a new stack: CSMF, NSMF, SSMF, and NFMF. It's always confusing. Suggested by 3GPP, and this is how they are integrated with the ETSI NFV. And I've added also the definition of these functional blocks. What do they do? It is important to understand that most of these functions are already absorbed by the existing service orchestration capability that they're in the vendor solution, and it is there in the ETSI ZFM, in the ONAP, in the TMF. Okay, so this is now the challenge: how the vendors now are trying to absorb these new function blocks. Any questions? I hope the storyboard was good to reach that point, to see the interlocks between the slicing management functional blocks and the ETSI NFV.
Thank you very much, Karim. I think it was very useful. I have one question, Karim. Let's imagine that we have an CSP which already deploying an end-to-end orchestrator, and this end-to-end orchestrator actually communicating with orchestrator for core, another orchestrator for RAN, a third orchestrator for transport. In this case, we don't need this line between the NSMF to the TN management. It can only communicate with the end-to-end orchestrator, and it will be the job of the end-to-end orchestrator to build the slice in each respective, that I call it domain, but I mean technical domain, core, radio, and transport. Is this variation possible, or service provider will need to stick to this 3GPP?
Two answers, okay? One is technical,
yeah,
and one is coming from the organizational or maybe political, okay?
Yeah.
Technical, you can always configure the VNFs or PNFs directly, okay? And in that case, no need for NMFMF. But it is also something good if the vendor is abstracting the complexity of the VNFs or the PNFs configurations by providing an EMS or NMFMF that can actually give you an API, and so that you can trigger it or you can use it, okay? So both options are fine, and both options exist, okay? And there is no, I would say, it's unlike the old 3GP. There is nothing that mandates that operators follow strictly whatever in the slide, okay? But we say that it makes sense, okay? The second one, politically and from organization perspective, because the solution touch many domains, resources and services, and service orchestration, domain orchestration, normally the teams tend to keep their scopes.
Exactly.
So if you don't really have a digital architecture or really a desire for a true digital transformation, people will always tend to keep their parts. So you still have to manage these blocks, okay? You cannot go directly to talk to a function in a domain that doesn't belong to you. No, you have to talk first to the abstraction layer, or you have maybe to break the automation flow and do some manual task, unfortunately. But this is the reality.
Yeah, agree.
There are some questions, I believe.
Yes. There was a comment. It become more complex. I'm not sure, Mohamed Shams, you're talking about which specific point, if you can explain. And we have a question from Mohamed Osman, meaning that NSSMF has the capability to communicate with the NFO by SOL 005 or IFA 013.
Yes, exactly. That the NSSMF should have this capability to be able to communicate to the NFVO, and most of the vendors of the orchestration are doing that. And the comment about the complexity, this is how 3GPP explains the architecture. Yani Shams, if you see the IMS architecture, and Farhang, I'm sure he knows that, it will look very complicated, right? But in the reality, the vendor solutions they absorb most of the blocks maybe in one function or two functions. So for example, in this one, you can find one vendor coming to you and telling you, by the way, I can give you the three of them into one solution, one software appliance. Okay, that's fine. But from architecture, it looks like that. Okay, so there's a very good question. Maybe it's it's not 100%. Okay, so the question is 5G vendors now are using the terms network functions instead of VNFs, as the functionality is now implemented using containers rather than virtual machines. Has ETSI not yet evolved to containers and network functions? Okay, so containers management from ETSI NFV, it is there in phase 4. Okay, there are some drafts in ETSI NFV, but we expect to see more standards and more data model, at least, not data model, sorry, information model, by Q1, Q2, Q3 2020. So the efforts are there. A little bit late, but it is there. Okay? But currently, most of the vendors are evolving their NFVO to be able to do two things. First of all, accept Helm charts and do the modeling for CNFs, like the way they used to do the VNFs. Second thing, integrate with Kubernetes. Okay, so the vendors are trying to evolve their solutions, and the standards are going, but in a very slow rate. I'm following the progress. I believe, hopefully by 2021, maybe Q1, you will have a new functional blocks like something called CICM. You will have a new modeling for CNF descriptors. And by the way, in ETSI NFV terminology, they don't use CNF and VNF. They call both of them VNF because they say, okay, both of them are not physical, are virtualized.
Yes.
But some is based on VM-based deployment and some is container-based deployment. I hope I answered this question.
Yeah, thank you for that. Do we have any other questions or?
Questions? Any questions? Okay, we don't have surveys really, survey system, but if you have any comments, please just feel free either to leave it here or maybe on the LinkedIn page. Any other questions? We are always happy to communicate.
Yeah. Thank you again, Karim, and thank you everyone for joining and enriching the session with your comments and questions. We'll carry on with Karim for a few more sessions, so please feel free to send us by your comments and what are the topics you are wishing to listen using LinkedIn. I did recorded this session, and I will also share it via LinkedIn, hopefully by Sunday. Thanks again. As Farhan mentioned, Ramadan Kareem, and good to see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Kareem. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.